Today we're going to consider how Java and the web can meet and interact. This is roughly under the topic of deployment. Although really, this is more like where can your Java code live? All right, and one of the things that we said it can live on the desktop app is it can live compiled in a jar file that you can deploy to people. Another place that Java code can live is in websites. And we're not talking about JavaScript now. JavaScript is something separate than Java. We're actually talking about full-blown, what we've been doing this semester, Java code. We can actually put it and have it doing web stuff. All right. There's two main styles of Java web, and it's largely a matter of preference which way that you do things, because they kind of compile to each other. The Java code gets compiled, and I believe that the first one compiles to the second one. First one is using beans, Java beans, and JSP pages. The second one is JavaServlets. All right. And let's look at what these are and give a very, very simple example so that you at least have an idea of what the capabilities are. I don't know if they still have this commercial on TV, but for Reese's peanut butter cups, there's always a commercial where a guy's holding a jar of peanut butter, eating out of it, and another guy's holding a chocolate bar, and they run into each other. And the one guy said, "You got chocolate on my peanut butter. You got peanut butter on my chocolate." Well, think of these this way. Java beans, well, JSP code, JSPs are HTML that contain Java code and can use Java beans. So those of you that may have done PHP before, you can have PHP. With PHP, you can have an HTML document that in the middle of it, it has some PHP code. And that PHP code can do its thing and produce whatever results that are needed. But JSP pages, Java server pages, are basically like souped up HTML pages. They're HTML pages that contain Java code and also contain and also can use Java beans. We'll talk about what that means in a few minutes here. Now, Java servlets are Java classes with HTML inside them, and they output HTML pages.
Like a little class, instead of coming up with like the game that you put, it'll come up with a small page or something.
Yeah, it actually outputs a page. Actually, the output of it is HTML. This will be a little clear when we take a look at it. Let me verify because I don't want to misspeak. Pretty sure it's been a while since I worked with these. JSP compiles to servlet. JSP engine translator requests a JSP file, compiles, all right. Yeah, JSP compiled into a servlet. JSP is translated into a servlet. So I did get it right. I just want to make sure I have the direction of this right. So these get compiled into this. Now, why would you choose to do one versus the other, JSP versus Java? It might depend on the strength of your team. And I mean, there's other factors too, but one of the factors that would come into play is the strength of your team. You know, if you have some really hot shot HTML developers, you might want them to work in this mode where they do the basic HTML and CSS and all those things, and you let someone else fill in the Java code. Now, Java beans are pretty straightforward to use. Like the example we'll see today is a real simple, straightforward. So even someone that isn't a full-blown Java programmer might be able to use Java beans on a web page. Java servlet might be if you have more hardcore Java developers on your team. All right. Because those are full-blown Java classes that have HTML inside of them. Let's see what Google, let's see what Chat GPT has to say about this. I'm curious. What? I think what I want to do. And of course, I got to get my phone out. I confirm that this is really me. It is. It's kind of cool. It's a little bit of a hassle, but it's kind of cool.
Only a hassle when you have to do it so many times.
Yeah.
And the second you see it and it's not you,
Right. Exactly.
you're like, man, thank you. I have this.
Very excellent way to put it. It's a hassle until you need it, and then it's a blessing. So why use JSP versus servlets? Okay. Separation of, well, this is saying somewhat of what I'm saying. Separation of concerns. In other words, what they're saying is that there's both logic and user interface code typically are often in servlets. All right, and that is not necessarily good. JSP offers a cleaner separation. Servlets are more low level and developers need to write Java code to generate HTML. It can make it more complex. JSP simplifies the development process by allowing developers to embed Java code directly into HTML. So in other words, you can have a web developer and just bring in a Java developer just to fill in the Java code. Presentation layer, again, servlets are often used to be managed. Rely on manual code, JSP specifically designed for presentation layer, readability and maintainability. Servlets can be a little ugly when you see the embedded HTML code in them, whereas JSP is typically cleaner and reusability. All right. So.
I'm not sure what's the difference in them.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
We're coming to that. I don't know, maybe I should have started with that, but we'll get around to seeing the difference between two of them. Now, the big question is why even do this instead of having a desktop app? And a lot of it has to do with keeping your code up to date. So if I compile my program and give you a jar of it and you install it on your computer and you're running something, if there's a problem, then your jar needs updated. All right, because it was deployed on your machine. If that is, if I'm running a web application, all right, then the Java doesn't run on the client machine. The Java runs on server. So we have our client connected to the internet, connected to a web server that understands Java.
You have to host it or something, correct?
Absolutely. But the Java code only lives on the server. If this is updated, the next person that makes a request will get the new code and so it makes it easier to fix bugs. I've worked in, the platform wasn't Java, but it was an old platform Power Builder. And we dealt with field engineers, people who went out into the field repairing machines, and keeping everyone up to date with the newest revision of the program was a big deal. Now things have changed since then, but still, if the code is stored locally, then you have your client here. If you give them a jar, then that's going to be stored locally on their machine. Yes.
I see. I was going to ask you, could you explain that a little
Right.
in detail, but you kind of nailed the hammer when you said you have to send them that jar.
Right.
When it's time for them to update, they have to request a whole new jar.
Yeah. Or there has to be some procedure that would update it.
Okay.
And so client 2, whereas here, as many people can connect to the website as possible, it's just the server that's running the code. All right, one thing we talked about is a bean here. And what is a bean? It should be very, you should be used to, none of the rules for Java Bean should surprise you. First of all, for a Java Bean, attributes are private. So you don't have public attributes. Everything has a set and get method. Well, most of your attributes have a set and get method, except for read-only attributes, which would only have a get method. So let's think back to our student class that you developed a lot of assignments on. That had private attributes. We use set and get methods for all the properties. What might be an example of a read-only attribute there? That might be a little tricky at first, but the tuition, in a way, is a read-only attribute. Excuse me. The tuition is a read-only attribute. Why? Because you can't set the tuition. You can get it. So you could ask, so I could make it look like an attribute. It's actually a computed attribute, if you want to be more correct. It's a computed attribute, and you could have gets to get it, all right? And the advantage of it, as you'll see, is that it makes the bean logic easy, all right, to call the get tuition, all right. A bean needs to only have one no argument constructor.
I noticed you put up the JSP or HTMLs that contain Java.
Yeah.
And the bottom says Java classes with HTML inside of them.
Right.
Does that mean they're complete opposites in a sense?
In a way, yeah, that's like the analogy, the chocolate, my peanut butter, my chocolate. One is a Java class that outputs some HTML. One is an HTML page that contains some Java code.
Okay, but they do basically the same thing.
Yes. So one constructor, no arguments. So if you've been coding the way that I suggested with the private attributes and the gets and sets, you're really most of the way there to create a bean. So let's look at an example of a bean and an example of a bean, an example of a JSP page, and an example of a Java servlet. Now, there can be a lot of setup dealing with this because things have to talk to each other in this environment. You have to have a web server that talks to the Java code, and that requires a certain kind of server. For development, I use what's called a Glassfish server. That's a web server that you can use in development as part of NetBeans. And if your machine isn't a full-blown server, you can work on it and develop on that. So let's look at the bean first. Again, I have it in a package called edu cube Akron, because this is from my Akron Java 2 class, and details Java. If we look at this, you'll see attributes private. One constructor. No argument constructor. In that no argument constructor, I could default things if I want to. You might think, well, gee, we've been using constructors all along. That's true, but that's a convenience. That's to save us from having to write a bunch of set statements. You can get it all done in a constructor. There's nothing, you could have written every one of the programs in this class that without any constructors at all. All right. You'd be okay. The only thing is you'd then have to call the set method. All right, you'll see the gets and sets. Wonder if there's a way to make text bigger. I hope you can see it. Gets and sets. Gets, of course, return whatever type the string is, the attribute is, in this case, a string. And the set has a argument of whatever type the attribute is. So this is string username. So this is like what we've done from second class on, just about. Now this is a very, very simple bean. All this is meant to get information about a user and display it on a web page. No big deal. The thing of interest here is how the stuff communicates with each other, how the pages, the web pages communicate with each other. I could add something to this. If this is a more involved example, I could have some calculated attributes where you would say get, tuition or get salary or something like that, and it could do some kind of calculation. Now, let me run this to show you what we get, and then we will look at the code. I have 2 pages. There's a compile process. It took a little quicker this time because I compiled it to test. And I have some data to enter in.
Normally this would send it to, what's going on there?
Repeat that?
Normally this would send it to the backend if there was one connected, correct?
Well, there is a backend corrected. It's my Java bean and my JSP page.
So it saves this data?
Well, it could. This particular example doesn't, but it could. This is not very good development. I use a password. I'm going to display that password in a minute. And user age, whatever. We click submit. And all this page does is spits out the information it got. Now, I hope you can see that we could do so much more with it. We could call functions on the bean to do things. We could save the bean in a database. That's a whole other more expansive topic. So we won't be going over that today. So if you notice this here, we have two web pages. We have one that's purely HTML, and we have one that is a JSP, which means it's a mix of Java code and HTML. So let's look at these two pages. Here's the index page. And this index page is like any HTML you might have seen. It's griping about some of my code. Oh, I have the head in the body. I have the head in the body section. I must have been sleeping that day. I have a form. The action is my JSP page that's going to process it. So it's in the same folder. So all I do is put this, the name of the JSP page, as the action of the form. I set up these fields, type of text with different names. And then when I click the submit button, that gets sent to the server, all right, to the back end. And this takes it from there. So let's see how we use a bean on the user details page. First of all, we have this statement here. I'm going to actually post this into Word. Even if you can see it, I can't really see it too well. Or Visual Studio Code, I'll paste it into.
Is there a benefit to using Java and HTML that you couldn't do with JavaScript or something?
Absolutely, you can do things on the server side. JavaScript, the way we're using client-side JavaScript is strictly client-side. This is using the server side. So let's take a look at this. All right, we have our regular HTML document, HTML head, so on and so forth. We have this statement here, use bean. ID is user info, class is edu, uAkron, Java2 details. So let's parse this statement and see if we can understand. This, of course, is the package that this is in. And if you note here, package to this details page is edu, uAkron, Java2. I have this statement here called set property. And I used a wildcard. I could set these individual properties if I wanted to. I could use the JSP set property method. So I could do something like this. Use a set property method instead of a get property. All right. Instead, what it does is it takes everything that's passed as part of the form, and it fills in that property in the bean. So notice these things in the bean are carefully chosen. Username is the name of the username field. Password is the name of password. Age is the name of age. That corresponds to the names of the properties in details. And the get and sets are get name of property, set name of property, with the second word capitalized. So it's not a coincidence that this matches this. It's to allow us that when we do this, it'll take everything that matches up from the form and set the bean values to that. So this in one shot sets the user info, or sets the username, the password, and the age on the Java bean. Now, we then use the getProperty method on the bean to output the value from that Java bean. Now let's think about this. What do you think this statement is like? This statement is like saying details user info equals new details. All right. It's like this statement. All right. That's what this is like. It's creating a new object called user info that fits the model of a bean. And this is the type of it. So assuming we imported that type, that's what this statement would look like. This again is a shortcut, but what it's doing effectively is it's calling all the set methods on the bean. So it's saying things like user info. This is the equivalent of user info set username, and the value comes from the form. And then we set all the fields, so username, password, and age. This does that all in one swoop because everything that corresponds to a attribute gets set on the bean. And this here is simply calling that bean dot get username, get password, get age. Now, if there was more stuff in this, if, for example, we had a function to save the bean, we could do something like this. I'm going to look this up to verify it, but if we had a save function on it, we could do something like this. And that could be written to update the database. If there was a username table or whatever, that would be a function in the bean to update it. So we can use it and take these shortcuts for gets and sets, but we could also treat it like a plain old Java class as well. I got the tag wrong. That's what it is. And then I could include some Java code in there. In this case, I could include it to save it. So I can use the bean to easily set and get properties, and then I can use that object to call other methods on the bean, to save it, to do some calculation. I could use a get to call some calculated property. All right, as long as I had a method appropriate in the bean. All right, the purpose isn't to teach you how to write these, but just to give you a taste of these. But you can see here how we would have Java code embedded within our HTML document. Now, on to Java servlets. And this one might give you a slightly better view of server-side code, because we're actually going to do some kind of calculation with this. Now, I'm calculating Fahrenheit to centigrade. Let's assume that I was calculating something that only our business knew. Okay, our shipping charges, let's say, how much it costs to ship these items. We might have some very elaborate shipping algorithm that depends on how fast they want it and how many products they're shipping and things like that. Well, that's like proprietary to us. Now, the formula to calculate centigrade and Fahrenheit is not proprietary to any individual. I mean, that's, known by everyone or available to everyone. Let's pretend that that function is proprietary to my company. All right. And let's go and run this guy, the Java servlet. So I have my form and I can type in an amount in centigrade and we'll, or actually, yeah, centigrade, and it will calculate it to Fahrenheit. And type in, let's say, so 0 centigrade is 32 Fahrenheit. Okay, let's look at this. I still have a basic HTML page that is my form. Notice, though, what the action of the form is. The action of my form is not a web page, it's the name of a servlet. So it is calling example servlet, which is the name of my servlet here. Example servlet. So it's going to call this servlet and run. That is part of the server's responsibility to map these names to the Java classes that they correspond to. So when I press this submit button, it calls Java servlet. All right, what happens there? Well, I have this big hunk of code. I am going to select it all. Pop it in here for easy viewing. Now, this is a servlet, so there's going to be HTML code in my Java. So this is a basic Java class. Package edu, Lorraine CCC, mzellers, import, IO exception, print writer, servlet exception. These classes are what make it a servlet. My example servlet extends HTTP servlet, which means it has to have certain functions in it. Process request that throws these exceptions. Process request is going to have all the code in here to send this to the client. If it's a get or a post, it is calling process request. So depending on whether this is posted to or the get method is chosen, it will, in both cases, it will call either do post or do get. And in both of those cases, it's going to call process request. I give it the request object and I have the response object. Remember in our drawing here, this is a request from what comes to the client to the server. And this is a response. So we have objects that represent both of those. Those get passed to the process request. This specifies the type of content I'm going to send back. So this is what sends back an HTML. What could a servlet return? It could return other kind of data. It could return JSON data. It could return XML data. It could return limited data. This, however, is going to return HTML code. We get the output variable, or this is where we're sending the output. We're sending the output back to the client by getting a writer object that's going to write and it's going to send the output back to the client. Now, here we have just regular Java code. We can get from the parameters the value centigrade. What's the value centigrade? Well, again, look at the HTML. Centigrade is the name of that text box. So that gets sent as part of the request as a parameter called centigrade. It's a string, right? Text boxes contain text. Therefore, I have to translate it to a number to do something with it. So I convert it to a double. I create my convert object, which we'll look at in a minute, but it's another Java object. I then call the C to F function to convert that centigrade value, and then I output a bunch of stuff. Here I'm outputting the HTML code. Doc type is HTML, HTML head, title, link to the style sheet, end of head, body, H1. I'm outputting the parameter again of what it was in centigrade, and I'm outputting the output calculation of what the value in Fahrenheit is. I close my tags and I'm good to go. If any of these turn out an exception, like for example, if I enter in something that's not a number, it's going to throw an exception when it tries to convert it to a double, and therefore we're going to get the output of danger. So let's run this. I type garbage in here. I get the output of danger because I threw an exception. Whereas if I type this in, it goes and it displays value in Fahrenheit. So servlet. All right. Now, again, this is a very simple example. Here's our convert object. All it does is it accepts and calculates centigrade or Fahrenheit given centigrade. What if this was some kind of code that had to exist on the server, though? Like validating a credit card or saving something to the database or whatever. All right. That might be a more realistic example than just calculating Fahrenheit to centigrade. Or maybe this is a shipping cost example, a shipping cost function, where it is proprietary information. But this is meant to represent a class of code that has to be run on the web server or application server. So in a nutshell, servlet HTML in my Java class. JSP code, Java in my HTML file. You're not expected to know how to write these, but you should know the difference between the two. And you should know why I might want to do it this way instead of just having a jar that I would deploy. And again, the ease of updating the code. I only have to update in one place if I make a change to the code, and that is the server. I only need to update it there. There's no need for me to update it on every individual client. All right. Can you imagine that every time Amazon updated their code, they'd have to get it out to everyone that's ever used Amazon? That would be ridiculous, right? So instead, that code lives on their server, and that gets called from the various clients, whether it be a mobile application or whatever. Now, again, I've talked about this before, and I alluded to this. You got to remember that classes don't only exist within one program or system. So for example, this convert function, let's imagine it was a shipping cost function. This could be as part of our mobile app, this class could be included in our web application. This class could be included in my in-house desktop application that our shipping clerks use. All right, all of them would be sharing the same code, all right, that does the business function, and they all would have different user interfaces that pass it the data and do what's needed with it. All right, a couple of things. I posted some important end of the semester information. Please read that. Among the stuff that's mentioned there is that there will be no lecture next Monday. All right. Next Monday is a chance for you, to if you got behind on assignments or whatever, if you need time to work on them, and my office hours are extended next week. So that if you're having difficulty with something, you can either come in person or connect online for me to discuss any issues that you have. So be sure that you read that. My office hours are extended next time. The week after, which is finals week, all right, I don't have any formal office hours. They're by appointment only. All right, so if you do need to see me, you have to make an appointment either online or in person. Finally, there's like a final due date of everything, and that is December 13th. So make sure everything is due December 13th. Yeah, because this is okay. I was thinking today was December 4th. No, this is November 27th, right? Next week is the week of December 4th. The following week is finals week, the week of December 11th. I confused myself there for a minute. So yeah, the final due date for everything is December 13th. So whether it be a redo, whether it be your final exam, whether it be assignments that you haven't turned in yet, everything is due by December 13th. If you have a reason that we can discuss it, and I will likely give you an incomplete if you can document good reasons for being behind in the class. I thought I had one more thing to say. Oh, the final will be due next Wednesday through the 13th. So it will be due December, it will be available December 6th through December 13th. Are there any questions? All right, if you think of any, feel free to email them to me. Again, if I don't see you, or we'll see you later at some point, either virtually or in person.